Yeah.
All right, it is 11 after 6 on Tuesday, March the 19th. House Criminal Justice Subcommittee is back in session. Madam Clerk, let's take the roll.
Representatives Davis, Fritz, Gillespie, Hardaway, Howell, Holsey, Johnson, Lamberth, Moody, Russell, Towns. Representative Doggett.
I am present.
Representative Doggett, you have a quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. Members, we will forego the personal orders. We do not have a sergeant of arms, but we have Representative Hardaway, Representative Towns. They are good to go. All right, we are on item number 8 is where we left off. House Bill 2329 by Representative Pearson. There's no need for a motion or second because we are already back in as we left off. I do have, I'm going to start on the list where we had members that had questions, and that is starting with Representative Gillespie.
Thank you so much, Chairman and sponsor. I just want to make sure before I ask a couple questions, all this is doing is putting back into place a permit system for handguns.
Thank you so much for the question, and yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'll just make a statement and then I'll follow up with a question or two. I think that permits are good simply because they allow for, or they require citizens to have training. It adds an added level of protection for the public through the background check system that's ongoing. It's not a one and done, which is what a purchase is. As we know, when you go purchase a firearm, you have to go through a background check, but that's it. Whereas the permit, whenever it expires, you have to get a new permit, and then you're also randomly selected as well throughout the course of that permit. And then also, I believe that permits help law enforcement. They help identify who should and shouldn't have guns, who should and shouldn't be in a place where they should be. And it also allows them to question someone that may, for whatever reason, be suspicious, or, you know, whether you agree or disagree with the reasons as to why they would stop that individual. It allows the officer to say, hey, I see you have a gun there. Let me ask you some questions. Whereas right now, that is not the case. For those reasons, I'm going to go ahead and say I do support this bill. I originally voted against the permitless carry bill a couple years ago. And to stick to those principles and to be consistent, to support my law enforcement back home specifically, that, you know, it's probably a shocker, but I do support this. So thank you.
Thank you. And look, when this was passed, a lot of people had whatever assumptions they had about why it needed to have happened. But the reality that we are experiencing in our state is our reality. and when you look at the facts, you look at the statistics about where we are as it relates to gun violence. If you continue to go along the very same path that got us to where we are, it only allows for more harm. I want to say just one thing because I looked up in our time away from each other the Bruin decision a little bit more that Chairman Halsey alluded to during or asked a question about. And as it relates to this legislation, it would not have an impact on it, though we might disagree on some of the merits of the Bruin decision. What the court did say that I think is important for this conversation, Justice Clarence Thomas delivered the majority opinion of the court. And in essence, it says, we too agree and now hold, consistent with Heller and McDonald, that the Second and 14th Amendment protect an individual's right to carry a handgun for self-defense outside the home. The parties nevertheless dispute whether New York's licensing regime respects the constitutional right to carry handguns publicly for self-defense. In 43 states, the government issues licenses to carry based on objective criteria. But in 6 states, including New York, the government further conditions issuance of a license to carry on a citizen's showing of some additional special need. Because the state of New York issues public carry licenses only when applicant demonstrates a special need for self-defense, we conclude that the state's licensing regime violates the Constitution. And so in the Bruin decision, it was particular to this additional purpose someone would have in order to be able to access a license. But as Justice Thomas mentions in his opinion, 43 states issue licenses to carry, and that they are not finding to be unconstitutional. But thank you for raising that point. And if you have more questions about that, I'm happy to answer those too. Chairman?
All right, Leader Lamberth.
Oh, thank you. So as the sponsor of the bill that you seem to be pretty displeased with, I'm curious, if we passed your bill, what would the criminal penalty be for someone who's carrying a firearm without a permit?
Thank you so much for the question. This bill specifically, Leader Lamberth, is going to be addressing what I do think was really not helpful. And you probably know those penalties better than I do. But I do believe, and I want to come to some solution here, that repealing permitless carry would help to fight against this epidemic of gun violence that we are seeing. Now, the reality is we can increase penalties for people who don't have a permit and all those things. But I think a first step and a reasonable step for all of us is to look and say, this isn't working in the ways likely that you or others might have intended. And to address that, we need to go back to ensuring that people at minimum have a permit, have some type of skill, have some type of knowledge about how to use a firearm before they get access to one in the state of Tennessee.
So would it surprise you to know that it's a C misdemeanor?
It doesn't surprise me to know that, and thank you for saying that. But again, what I want us to focus on and would love your input on is how we repeal permitless carry and what other steps we could potentially take in order to end this epidemic of gun violence.
Well, and thank you for bringing that point up. So, and again, you weren't here during this whole debate, and so we went back and forth a lot on this issue. But it's a C misdemeanor. It's the same thing as a speeding ticket. It's the same thing as running as a stop sign. And in almost 20 years of handling criminal cases on both sides of the aisle, a one-time class does virtually nothing to actually make someone safe out there to carry a firearm. Now, what should happen and what we encouraged as part of this bill is that if you're going to carry a firearm, you should go through constant training. You should go regularly. Now, the state should not require that. That should be something that you do as a responsible citizen, because there are 399 individuals that were killed in Memphis last year. And I join you in trying to do virtually anything to go after those murderers, go after those repeat violent felons, go after those folks that should not have a firearm. But if we were to do this, and you probably already know this, but again, you weren't here for the debate, and look, you just had not been elected yet. So when I say that, it's just, we were here and we had this big debate on this, on constitutional carry, but you could already carry your gun. And even if your bill passes, an individual who's a law-abiding citizen exercising their Second Amendment rights could already have their gun in their car, their boat, their bicycle, their motorcycle, their business, their home, their friend's car, boat, motorcycle, bicycle, home, or business. And to me, to say that a C misdemeanor, a traffic ticket, which in every court I've ever been in is basically a fix-it ticket. If a law-abiding citizen didn't have a permit and they had a firearm on them, I handled one of these cases one time a couple of years ago. It was a young man that worked late at a restaurant, and his job given to him by the manager was to take the cash home at the end of the day. So the bank from the till, so to speak. And he carried a firearm. He only carried it from the business to his car. because he was worried that somebody's liable to figure out he's carrying cash out to the vehicle. And so he carried a firearm. But one night when he's headed out, an officer was doing kind of a late night check, stopped him just as my other friend from Memphis, you guys from Memphis kind of get together on this issue, it sounds like, but stopped him and he gave him a ticket for this. He came to court. I happened to be involved in the case. The judge said, well, look, could you get a permit? He said, sure. He said, okay, go get a permit. He went and got a permit and the case was dismissed. It absolutely served no purpose whatsoever. So I'm all about real solutions to get to this problem. We have got to get the rate of violent crime down, not only in Memphis, but throughout the state, but particularly Memphis. We all need to come together because every Memphian is a Tennessean. So just repealing constitutional carry or permitless carry, I've heard it referred to as both ways. In just my opinion, I mean, you ask, is not going to do anything to get to the core of the felons and quite frankly, juveniles and other individuals that are not, that are prohibited from having a firearm now. To just go after law-abiding citizens that have no criminal record, but have a right to bear arms, to go after those folks with a ticky-tacky ticket, I mean, just a C misdemeanor, I just don't think gets to the core of it. So I appreciate you bringing the bill. It renews a conversation that we had years ago. I just think there's other things that we could do. And I wanted to throw that out there. I wasn't trying to do a gotcha question, but I mean, the C misdemeanor to me was just, I don't know, something that it just didn't seem like it just went after good folks. They just hadn't gotten a permit. So we took that C misdemeanor off the books and said, we're not going to mess with good people that are law-abiding citizens that happen to have their firearm outside all the places I listed. We're going to go after those really repeat violent felons, and we increase the penalty for stealing a firearm. If anybody steals a gun in this state, it ought to be a felony. Well, guess what? Through this bill that we passed, and that's not the part you're repealing, we made it a felony to steal a firearm, regardless of the value. So I just think we ought to focus on the actual criminals out there and leave the good law-abiding citizens alone, even when it comes to a ticket. But I do share your fervor that if somebody is going to carry a firearm, if they're going to possess a firearm, you should learn how to properly use it and store it, and you should not at any time be reckless with that firearm. So I think we're headed toward the same goals. We just got a different way to get there. So thank you.
Thank you. And look, I want to say two things. One, the reality is the history of relaxing gun laws is a part of what we've been doing in Tennessee. In 2007, the Stand Your Ground laws passed. In 2010, guns and bars laws passed. 2013, just alluded to, guns and truck laws passed. 2014, guns in trunks law is amended. 2018, we overturned firearm dispossession. In 2019, a law is passed making it illegal to give, loan, or transfer a gun to a person who's mentally ill. That's something we were actually happy about. In 2019, a law is passed creating a gun permit for background checks, but that doesn't go much further. In 2021, permitless carry law is passed. We have a long history of actually reducing our laws as it relates to people getting access to guns. That is the problem. And this legislation continues that. And to your point, the reality is we've got a responsibility to do everything possible in order to do something about the epidemic that we are experiencing. And it isn't that this is going to be the fix, the solution. I got a couple more bills coming up that I hope also are part of the solution, but we cannot ignore the reality that by having permitless carry, by not ensuring that everybody who is a law-abiding citizen even has some training, we have set ourselves up for a very devastating situation that we're in. And so, for instance, if you take a class, in order to get a permit, you learn about safe storage. You learn about things that could prevent our children from getting access to your weapon and committing suicide. You learn about how to properly use a firearm so that you don't make a mistake and hurt or harm yourself or others. The reality is it isn't about taking away someone's constitutional rights, as you alluded to, or making it more difficult for people just to be able to exercise their constitutional right. It's in order to ensure that every person who gets access to a firearm in a legal fashion, I'm worried about the people who have it legally, are actually educated and equipped with the necessary tools and the skills that they need in order to be able to use it safely. Because it is the negligence that I'm also deeply concerned about, not just the criminals who are misusing firearms. I mean, the reality is we got people, you have to get a license to be able to drive a car, right? Like we have a bill that's already been passed that says teach young people need to be educated about firearms, but there's no obligation for adults to be educated about firearms. But we say that our kids in K through 12, they need to know. And I believe you're a big advocate for that. But on the other side, there's no obligation at all for parents or adults who are responsible, firearm owners, to be able to get education. Like that's the problem that I think we need to address. And I think this is just one of those steps to get there.
gosh, it's tough living in a free country, right? Where we stand for civil rights, where we stand in Tennessee for each individual to have the rights guaranteed to them by God and in the Constitution and Bill of Rights.
Mhm.
I mean, those civil liberties that you've just, rattled off several bills there where we've continued to expand rights in Tennessee. Thank God for Tennessee, because those individual rights that are included in the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, I don't have to go to a class to say that the police can't search my dwelling without a warrant or probable cause. I mean, you can't do that under the Fourth Amendment. I don't have to go to a class to say under the Fifth Amendment, I don't have to give testimony against myself. I don't have to, under the First Amendment, to go to a class to say how you and I, by permission by the government somehow or another, go to a class to say how we can exercise our First Amendment right as we're doing right now. And under the Second Amendment, I don't have to go to a class to say that I have a right to bear arms. Those are ordained, those are absolutely ordained by our Creator, and they are not something that we should be infringing upon. And so again, I don't think we're that far apart. We just have a different perspective of looking at it. I will say that you are probably familiar with the phrase post hoc ergo propter hoc. So just because a thing follows a thing doesn't mean it's caused by that thing. There's lots of reasons why we have violent crime in this state. Protecting law-abiding citizens and their freedoms in this state are not why we have crime. We need to get to those root causes of poverty and criminogenic factors like mental health issues and generational crime within families where you have parents that are incarcerated and children that are abandoned by both families and communities, and issues that we can work on. Let's leave law-abiding citizens out of it. That's my perspective.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your comments. But the reality is, though, you might not be able to find exact causation. There is something called correlation. And as you weaken laws across this state and across this country as it relates to guns, you see an increase in the amount of violence and deaths due to guns. That's not accidental. That is something that is being caused by the very actions of this General Assembly, by the very actions of people who have a responsibility and swore on the Constitution not to do things that are injurious. I'm glad you mentioned the Constitution, because in our Tennessee State Constitution, Article 1, Section 26, it says that the citizens of this state shall have a right to keep and to bear arms for their common defense, but the legislature shall have power by law to regulate the wearing of arms with the view to prevent crime. This was in the updated 1870 version. The people who helped to write the Constitution that we are living under and that we are sworn to protect and to uphold have even said that you have a responsibility as legislators to do something as it relates to the view to prevent crime. And if I am telling you that this reality that we are living in can be changed by the very people who are in this room, by the very people who are in this body, it is woefully sinful for us to only offer consistently thoughts and prayers to our community when we actually got the power to do something differently. I think it is a shame to argue that God has ordained for children to be to die due to gun violence. I think it is despicable for us to say that we throw our hands up and say that individual liberties are more important than the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness of every individual in our state and all the children that we are sworn and have a responsibility to protect. And so while there's always an important balance to live in a free country, a country that whose Constitution actually called me 3/5 of a person for quite some time, let's be clear, but to live in a country that seeks to aim to make freedom a reality, that seeks to aim to make liberty a reality, that seeks to aim to make justice a reality, it requires the very God hands and God feet of the people who are in positions of power to do something differently when they see that the solution that they have offered has failed. And it takes humility to do that. It takes responsibility and accountability to say, you know what, I might have gotten that wrong, but I want to work on it and I want to fix it and I want to solve the problem. In this situation, we got wrong. And it's a part of a long streamline of things that this legislature has done as it is related to the relaxing of gun laws that has left us and our communities extremely vulnerable to the epidemic of gun violence. And so this is one step, and there are many more that we need to take. And if you have a budget amendment as it relates to increasing hundreds of millions of dollars for poverty, I will sign on to that. If you have other legislation as it relates to mental health issues and awareness, I will sign on to that, because I do understand we have to solve the root causes of the problems, but we cannot neglect the decisions that have been made by our body that have had harmful ramifications for our community. Thank you, Chairman.
All right, thank you. Next on our list is Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have to, that I felt like my colleague's story actually was a story about what a great example of how the law works. Got in trouble for not having a permit. Said, oh, wow, okay, I'll go get that permit. because I knew it was important. And that's how it worked. And it worked well for quite a time. I don't feel the need to carry my weapon with me, but I've grown up around guns and have guns. And so one year I was teaching, and the school police officer was giving a course in gun safety, the 8-hour course back when it was a real course and you had to go there and take it. And he asked me if I would come and take his course because it was the first time he ever taught it. And he kind of wanted me to say, as a teacher, how did I do? And I said, well, I've been really curious about the course. I never felt like I needed to take it. But I went and took the course because he wanted me to. And I learned so much. You think you might know enough, you think you know everything you need to know, but he did a great job because I learned a lot, and I was so glad that I took that course. And why we would remove that as so that we know that people who have these guns are good folks and are going to do the right thing and know what they're doing with their gun is not preventing anyone from doing anything. And I would love to see that, and I would love to see your bill back, because I think that it does make us safer.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Representative Johnson. And again, like we've said that education as it relates to firearms is important for children K through 12. At minimum, we can say for the people who actually purchase the firearms, education is important for them too.
All right, Chairman Halsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on Bruin, also what Clarence Thomas said was you have to interpret this based on 1796. And when it said shall not be infringed, what does that mean to those people who wrote it? And of course, in that setting, shall not be infringed means you wouldn't have a permit processed to carry a firearm, and you wouldn't have a permit process to speak, or you wouldn't need to have a permit to exercise your right to write an editorial in the paper, or you wouldn't have to have a permit to go to church. Those are all fundamental issues that you don't have to have a permit to do. Sandwiched in the middle of that is the second. There's also an assumption on your part that lawless people who are willing to kill somebody else are going to obey this law. And they will not, because lawless people don't obey law. So as the representative from Knoxville said, that good folks, law-abiding people, they do go to classes, they do learn, they do what they shouldn't do, or not to do what they shouldn't do. They do learn to teach their children. They do all those things. Lawless people do not do those things. So at the end of the day, I think you can't say that people are safer when lawless people do not obey the law. And on the point of in our Constitution, that has troubled me for a while. And I'm not so sure that the Supreme Court would rule that our Constitution's in error. I mean, our Constitution also says that marriage is between a man and a woman, and we lost that one. So I'm not so sure what they'd say about how our Constitution reads, but I just wanted to point that out. That in 1796, you wouldn't require a permit. They would deal with somebody killing somebody completely different.
Thank you for that. I definitely think in reading the opinion, it's over 100 pages long, but if you read even the first 10 pages, they do encourage us to think about the lens of 1796, but they also articulated in the very same piece, and we can go read it together. They use a modern lens when looking at the legislation, because they even articulate the types of weapons and firearms that are used today were not the same that were used in 1796. So they aren't ignorant to the realities that we're experiencing. And Justice Thomas, he again mentions 43 states in his opinion, which is the majority opinion. He says 43 states do have issuance of a license. But the problem with the New York legislation was that it was kind of twofold, that you weren't just getting a license, you had a responsibility to show the reasoning why. And that was what was not permissive. But to the assumption that you're making, lawless people may not support this legislation, but it is actually for the law-filled people. It's for those of good conscience and goodwill who would go to the classes, who would ensure that they had the information, which could really have benefits in our communities. Today, you can go to a store and purchase a firearm, right? A straw purchase obviously comes with significant penalties. But if you are a law-abiding person, you could go and purchase a firearm without knowing how to use it, without knowing how to store it, without knowing all of the consequences that really come with having a firearm and the potential safety troubles that you're actually creating for your young people or the people in your family. My thinking is, Chairman, which I know all of us deeply care about, is to make sure that all of our children are more safe. And if you are a law-abiding person who is getting this firearm, why wouldn't we want for them to be educated about how to store it safely, how to make sure that their kids don't get a hold to it? Like, there's no reason for us not to do that. Because if I keep that same logic, and I'm on transportation, so forgive me, but if I keep that same logic, why then do we get people to get driver's licenses to be able to drive cars? Like, why is that important for them to do? If a vehicle as well could kill someone, a vehicle as well has so many other factors associated with it. But we do that because we want everybody who's on the road to be operating on the same playing field. It's like, you know the rules, you know how a car functions, you know how a car operates. When it comes to firearms, I believe it's important, it's imperative that we make sure that people who have access to them legally, not illegally, the people who get access to them legally know how to use them. Thank you, Chairman.
All right, Representative Fritz.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your passion, Representative. I do. We completely disagree, and you know that.
I do.
But sometimes it's good to dissent because iron does sharpen iron. You mentioned root cause analysis.
Mhm.
And so that implies there's a causal action and some corrective action that can be applied. You would never do a root cause analysis tree and find that an inanimate object were the causal factor in those deaths that we all mourn, and we all do. There sometimes seems to be in your discussion a separation of the reality that the common factor is an evil criminal person that commits those acts. In every single case, there's a person that does that. And there's almost a separation of accountability versus what may be a false sense of security. Our founders, you mentioned the Constitution, and you mentioned the founders and our responsibilities under the Constitution, and to not do anything injurious to the people, to the Constitution. I would offer that it's an abhorrent thing for us to even consider stripping that God-given, that natural right from people just to make ourselves feel a little bit more safe, because there's nothing real to it. It's just a feeling that we're trying to invoke. The last thing I'll offer, and I do have a question at the end of this, because I do appreciate the work you've put into it. I do. That 1870 version of our Tennessee Constitution, have you ever asked yourself why we added those words on to that version?
The first one was quite racist. It says a white man, the free white man of this
let me
state
finish.
have a right to
I've
keep.
still got the floor. Let me finish.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were asking.
Have you ever asked yourself why we added those words onto that? And it was simply to oppress people. One of the biggest things that we have to do in our roles, I think, is make sure that we're very diligent in not allowing anything to happen that's going to be used to oppress folks in the future. Every time that we have in the history of our nation, I think, done something greatly oppressive to people, and there's been a tyranny of sorts that has taken place, we've departed from that oath to the Constitution that men and women now swear an oath to. So I guess my question for you is this. How do we reach a point so that we recognize that there is the human element of accountability in this and address that? What do you propose that we do there?
Yes, repeal permitless carry. Look, I'll say two things. One, Article 1, Section 26 in 1834, that the free white men of this state shall have a right to keep and to bear arms for their common defense, was what was changed in 1870. A whole lot of other things were changed too, Representative Fritz, that actually hurt a lot of Black folks' ability to engage in the political process. You all know 1870. It is the first census post the Civil War. It's the first time that Black Americans, African Americans, are considered whole people. My ancestors, Edmund and Sylvia, I'm a 7th-generation Tennessean, were first called people in 1870, but a lot of constitutions in the South changed then to reduce Black voter participation. So I'm not saying that the 1870 version of our Constitution was perfect or that the people were infallible, but it is important that we understand what did happen, and the oppression that you are mentioning and the oppression that I'm mentioning are quite different things. I think giving a legislature power to protect its citizens from crime is important, and we talk a lot about that. And so I don't know if I would agree with you sort of on that point, because a legislature shall have power by law to regulate the wearing of arms with a view to prevent crime. That just kind of makes sense to me. When I think about what we must do, just take this example, and I won't use any names here. An individual in my district ran inside of their house to grab something and to run back in the car because they were going somewhere. In between time, they left their gun on their seat, the front seat of the car. A young boy picked up the firearm, accidentally shot their sibling at 9 years old, and their sibling ultimately passes away due to the gunshot wound. That isn't about a criminal. It isn't about a kid getting a felony or dad getting a felony. That is about an individual who, had they known better, had they had a little more education, had they really understood that this potentially would be a crime, they would have done something differently. And all repealing permitless carry does is to make sure that if you own a firearm in this state, you actually just know the best practices of having it and of using it. It isn't to abridge anybody's rights. It isn't to abridge anybody's freedoms or anything like that. You'll still get access to the weapon. Nobody's taking it from you, right? People who have it now, nobody's going back and taking it. It's just to ensure that the people who get access to a firearm in our state, in the state of Tennessee, we all will know, we all will understand that they have been trained. They do have information about how to use it and how to protect your kids, my kids, nieces and nephews from being, hopefully, from being harmed by this weapon. I would not think, I do not believe that this is the attack on an individual's liberties. They still get access to their firearm. It is just making sure that everybody who has a firearm legally in our state know how to use it. But also, can I say this, Representative Fritz, also know some of the consequences, not only for mishandling it, but for the misuse of it in the commission of other crimes, such as straw purchases. And I think that's something that's really important. It was in the news recently. A guy who committed a crime in Memphis had gotten the firearm from East Tennessee. And it's like, wait, how is this trafficking happening? And so that's some of the education that needs to go on as well. The people who might be legally purchasing these weapons could be then illegally giving it to people who shouldn't have access to it. But there's no way for us to trace or track that without permits. So I appreciate those comments. Thank you, Chairman.
Any other questions for our sponsor? Seeing none, we're now voting to send House Bill 2329 on the full criminal law. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
No.
The noes prevail. The bill fails. If you wish to be recorded as an aye, see the clerk. Item number 9, House Bill 2131 by Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Before you is House Bill.
Excuse me, House Bill 2331.
Yes. Okay. Before you is House Bill 2331, the Case Expediency Act. Before I present, Mr. Chairman, I request a roll call vote. There are no amendments.
Bill
on this
fails
bill.
for a lack of a motion.
What?
Item number 10, House Bill 2333 by Representative Pearson. All right, you're recognized.
Forgive me. Can I get clarity on what happened?
There was no motion or a second on the previous bill, but you are properly recognized on this one.
You didn't ask for a motion or a second. But you typically call for a motion and a second. In every committee I've ever been in, the chairman has called for a motion and a second.
Leader Lambert.
Since we're on House Bill 2333, the proper motion and second, I make a motion for summer study.
That is a
Hold on.
proper motion. It has been seconded.
There
is objection.
This is pretty obscene what y'all are doing right now.
There is objection. So
It's a debatable motion, but I've been motioned and second on this bill. Doesn't that go to me before someone is able to interrupt? I get an opportunity to present the bill.
The posture we're in, it's now properly before the committee. There was a motion made by a member of the committee
Mhm.
to make a summer study motion. It was seconded. There is objection, so there will be, there is a debate. It is debatable.
My question is, after it was motioned and second by the first two members, the member then gets to present on the bill. I haven't had a chance to present on the bill at all before it was sent to summer study. I've never seen that happen.
Leader Lambert.
Mr. Chairman, it's my motion. We can debate it. The presenter can present whatever you would like.
Right.
I'm allowed to make a motion on this committee as a member of this committee at whatever time that I am recognized. I was recognized by the chair, and we can now debate that motion. I actually think this is something that I would like to see studied in the summer. I think it's an interesting idea. But
Yes.
as a member of this committee, there was a motion and a second. It's probably for the committee. I asked to be recognized, and I have made a motion for a summer study. I'm comfortable with that debate, but that is the debate we are upon now.
Yes,
Mr.
and
Chairman, Mr. Chairman, I mean, I don't know who you're recognizing next or who's on the list, but I'm not trying to cut off anything else. I had a motion that I made, and now we're on that motion.
Thank you, Leader. I think I was recognized after the motion of the second. Is that incorrect?
Yes, I do believe he is correct. I did technically recognize him on that. And then your hand came up, so I called on you. But if you will withdraw your motion,
Mr. Chairman, at this juncture, I won't withdraw the motion, but I would ask that the sponsor of the bill be recognized for whatever presentation he would like to make on this, because I think it would be helpful to debate on my motion. So
Okay.
I'm not trying to cut him off on presenting his bill. That's just the motion that I have on this bill as we are going through it. Now, maybe that motion is successful, maybe it fails, but I would like to hear his presentation on the actual bill. It was not my intention to cut off any kind of presentation.
Representative Pearson, you're recognized.
Thank you. I gotta tell you, thank you. I'm a little frustrated and flustered by this. The previous bill was the Case Expediency Act that was brought by one of my constituents. And so just to see that get, turned down because of whatever, for whatever reason, was very disheartening. And to Ms. LaVonda Thorne Henderson, I promise to bring the bill back. Appreciate your fight and your advocacy. This is House Bill 2333, Ghost Gun Parts Act. This adds into our definition under TCA 39-17-1302, two definitions: a switch or auto sear device designed, made, or intended for use in converting a weapon to shoot automatically more than one shot without manual reloading by a single function of the trigger, or in essence, the automatic weapon. That definition being added, and also adding a firearm built from a weapon parts kit, including a frame or receiver parts kit, and not marked with a serial number. Many companies are doing business in our state, and they must do that safely. These two definitions that are going to get added actually come out of conversations that I've had with other representatives from across the country. And some of these I hadn't learned a lot about until the last several months. And so one is there are 80% guns or jigs, also known as 80% lowers, that are manufactured without a serial number, which makes tracking and law enforcement's job very difficult when these are used in a crime. And so this would add in 80% lowers to require that they have a serial number be added if these companies are going to do business in the state. And the second definition that's added here, a switch or auto sear device, is actually one that's near to our community. Just the other day on Bill Street, an individual had an auto sear. Yes?
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think you're speaking on 2336. We're on 2333.
Forgive me. So I have that 2336 is specifically dealing only with 80% receivers. I have 2333 dealing with the definitions here. It says this legislation adds a new section that defines auto sear, sear switch, and switches and ghost guns parts.
Okay, sorry
Is
about
that
that.
correct?
Yes, continue, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Look, an auto sear is added particularly to a firearm to make it go from potentially a semi-automatic into what is currently illegal, an automatic weapon. And again, this happens with most likely with Glocks that we have seen in our communities and across our state and country. One of these was used in the commission of a crime in the last few days in our district on Bill Street. the use of an auto sear, and unfortunately, an individual did lose his life for these reasons. And so I would like to add these two definitions of an auto sear that is, again, making a weapon that has manual reloading into an automatic weapon, and also add in that anyone who buys a firearms kit, that it must have a serial number. So that we don't have people, and this is to what was mentioned before, you could have individuals who have committed crimes in the past who are not allowed to own firearms, actually buying these 80% lowers, getting the rest of the weapon 3D printed, and there's no way for us to trace or to track where those weapons are going. And so I think as it relates to law enforcement, as it relates to keeping weapons out of the hands of people who should not have them, and protecting our communities, this would be a good law. And so with that explanation, Mr. Chairman, I renew my motion and stand ready for questions.
All right, thank you. The motion that we had earlier was for a summer study motion. There was objection. That is a debatable motion. So we will open it up now for debate on the motion. And I'm going to start with Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just interesting to me that most members are treated to the ability, yes, usually there says, is there a motion or a second? But the times I've not seen that happen are on gun bills particularly. And then calling the question before there even gets to be a debate or discussion is very similar. And so I've only seen it done with certain members and on certain ideas. And it's very distressing when you sit there and if you're waiting for a motion, other members are asked.
Objection has been.
To your own motion.
I thought that we were talking
About
about
the summer study.
the motion for, oh, yeah, okay, I'll get there. Happily. So this idea that we are going to do everything we can stop a bill before it's discussed, summer study might be something you're interested in doing, but couldn't we just hear what we're talking about and maybe make it a little more clear? Just because you have this idea it should go to summer study, can't we let other folks in the body discuss it before we get to that point of making motions? Because I mean, these are really important ideas that should be discussed in front of the public, quite frankly, as well as with the body.
Any other discussion on the motion? Leader Lamberth.
So these items are already illegally federally. This literally is a redundant bill that adds nothing to the safety of our state, and thus the reason I made a summer study motion. I think it can be a part of a larger conversation, but to make something just illegal at the state that's already illegal at the federal level, to me, and I wanted to hear the explanation from the sponsor of the bill, but when recognized, I made a summer study recommendation because I would hope that we'd have a summer study on all of this area. I hope that there's 7 or 10 or 8, hopefully maybe 15 or 20 different bills that we can actually come together when we're not in session and really look at this. But at the same time, to make something illegal at the state that's already illegal at the federal level doesn't seem to move the ball down the field much. That's my motion for summer study.
We do that a lot here. Usually my colleagues across the aisle.
Any other discussion on the motion?
Do I get to say something on this, Chairman?
Yes, sir, go
You run
ahead.
your committee quite differently than I've experienced. Look, summer study, typically for everybody's watching, is where bills go to die. And I am not naive to that fact and that reality. It may be true that the federal government seeks to regulate these things, but it didn't stop the individual in my community at 52 years old from being killed by a person who had an auto sear on his weapon. It has not prevented 80% lowers from being used and purchased by people in our state who should not have access to these weapons because they are untraceable without a serial number. And so it's us making a determination as a state that it is important that we protect the people of our state and that we have our own laws in addition to federal laws that help to protect our community. And I don't know why on earth that would be a problem when we are dealing with an issue as significant as this one. the responsibility falls on all of us to do everything that we can. And sending things just to summer study so that you can ignore it or try and put our heads in the sand when we are dealing with something as grave and as serious as gun violence is in our communities. And then we blame the individuals without ever taking a look in the mirror and saying, what can we do as legislators to fix this problem, is despicable and is a waste of our constituents' time and their energies and their efforts, which is why I'm still, Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, I was very disappointed that I was not able to speak on the previous bill that one of my constituents brought to me, and hope that when folks stand up here and bring up bills, they do get the respect that they are due, not just as members, but as representatives, to be able to speak and advocate on behalf of our communities, regardless of whether or not you're going to send some to summer study, vote it down, or vote for it.
Any other discussion on the motion? The motion is that this is moved to a summer study. It was seconded. Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you help us and help the public understand what summer study means? Is that something that we will vote on and then it will happen? Or is it something that we will vote on and show our intentions and then it'll be up to the speaker? Can you help, either you or Leader Lambert, help the public understand what that motion means if passed?
Yes, sir. In times past, if there's a summer study motion made, those members have an opportunity to petition the speaker in writing to request a summer study be conducted on that particular piece of legislation.
Would that be me, or would that be Leader Lambert who would do that?
That would be
He
the
made the
sponsor
motion.
of the legislation. You could also get with the member that made the motion and have a joint letter requesting that information.
Okay, we can do that.
And I assume, Mr. Chairman, that Leader Lambert probably wants to respond to that.
Based on the aspersions cast in this committee today, I don't really have much of a response. But I've stated my position. I think this is something that we should continue to look at. And I feel like the bill is completely redundant. It doesn't do anything to improve public safety, but a serious conversation, whether in session or out. But I used to chair this committee, and you, sir, served on it. And we had several serious summer studies. But the member presenting the bill doesn't believe that and wasn't here for that, and so doesn't know where I'm coming from. So I mean, I am interested in studying how to improve the safety of this state at any time, in session or out of session. But again, I can't convey that in a way that is believed.
Mr. Chairman, I'm looking forward to working with Leader Lambert and with the sponsor in the serious summer study. And I appreciate the leader bringing the motion and offer for summer study. And I appreciate the sponsor for bringing the bill for us to study. So I'll be looking forward to working with the leader and of course with you, Mr. Chairman. And we'll wake Chairman Halsey up with you too, sir.
Thank you. Any other statements? Seeing now, we're voting now to send House Bill 2333 to summer study. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes prevail. It goes to summer study. If you wish to be recorded as a no, please see the clerk. Item number 11, House Bill 2336 by Representative Pearson.
Do the thing.
You are recognized.
Thank you. Listen, they will use all the tools they can to stop our progress. And so let's be on it. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, before you is House Bill 2336, about 80% receivers. Before I present, Mr. Chairman, I request a roll call vote, and there are no amendments on this bill. This bill amends Tennessee Code annotated Title 39, Chapter 17, Part 13 by adding new definitions within a new section as follows: 80% frame, 80% receiver, firearm frame, firearm receiver. Currently in our Tennessee Code, these things are not outlined. The intent of this bill is simple. An 80% frame or 80% receiver shall not be manufactured, distributed, sold, or transferred on or after July 1st, 2024, unless a manufacturer's serial number is prominently stamped on the item or on a piece of metal securely affixed to the item, What was alluded to earlier was that the federal government already regulates this. They seek to regulate auto sears, but there is not a lot of regulation as it relates to 80% frames. This is important for us to do because we need to make sure that anyone who manufactures in our state or anyone who is coming into our state or selling in our state have a serial number, because that ensures that the person who is purchasing it actually gets a background check. Right now, you can buy the 80% lower, get the rest of it 3D printed, have a functioning firearm without ever doing a background check, without anyone ever knowing that you have access to the weapon. And we're seeing it increase. I think in the fiscal note, it said there's been a 500% increase in the last few years, according to ATF, of these 80% lowers and firearms being used in the commission of crimes. So an 80% receiver or lower, it's an incomplete firearm, but we want to make sure that that does have a serial number and make sure that the people who purchase it actually go through a background check, which you would have to do if you were purchasing any other firearm. The reality is right now, if you purchase an 80% receiver or lower or jig and you get it 3D printed, it's untraceable. No one knows who has it, where did it come from. And so it is very likely, and we're already starting to see this in different parts of our state, seeing an increase in people buying these weapons who cannot have access to them, to some of the things we mentioned earlier, because they have committed crimes or for other reasons that they're barred from purchasing a firearm. So this would make sure that anybody who gets one of these 80% receiver or lowers, or really they're called firearm kits, are not able to get it unless it has a serial number, which means that they have a background check. And so with that explanation, Mr. Chairman, I renew my motion and stand ready for questions.
Thank you for that. Any questions for the sponsor, Representative Johnson?
So can these be mailed to your home? Are these the ones that you can get in mail that I hear about?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. Okay, because I hadn't heard the 80% part. So not totally complete. That's how they can do this. And then there's no serial number or anything like that.
Attached
Because
to it.
ultimately when it's mailed, it's not a complete firearm.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you.
Any other questions for the sponsor of the bill? Seeing none, now voting to send House Bill 2336 on the full criminal. This will be a roll call vote. Madam Clerk, please take the roll.
Representative Davis? Davis votes no. Representative Fritz? Fritz votes no. Representative Gillespie?
No.
Gillespie votes no. Representative Hardaway?
Aye.
Hardaway votes aye. Representative Howell? Representative Holsey?
No.
Holsey votes no. Representative Johnson? Aye. Representative Johnson votes aye. Representative Lamberth?
No.
Representative Lamberth votes no. Representative Moody? No. Representative Moody votes no. Representative Russell?
No.
Representative Russell votes no. Representative Towns? Representative Towns votes aye. Chairman Doggett?
No.
Chairman Doggett votes no. Chairman Doggett, you have 3 ayes and 8 noes.
Bill fails.
Thank you, Chairman. I know I have 52. Are we going to wait for that?
We'll get to that one as we work through the calendar. We'll be continuing next week as well. So
Okay, thank you. And I do hope, Chairman, you take into consideration the comments that I made about us representing our constituents and really making an effort to get a motion in a second. And I've seen some other chairmen, like Carr, make sure at least asking. And I didn't even get a second in his committee, but he asked for a motion and for a second. And that's just respectful to people.
well, I would strongly encourage you and everyone to make sure that when you come to a committee that you have worked your bill to make sure that you have those motions and those seconds. I know early on in the year when people are come back in and are rusty and not familiar with the rules, sometimes we'll ask, but we're deep into the legislative process at this time. So it's important that we all stay awake and that we make sure that we're on top of our game to make sure that we get those procedural motions in place. Thank you. All right. Item number 12, House Bill 2350 by Representative Johnson. You're recognized. Okay.
What this bill does is And unfortunately, earlier there was someone here to testify. I don't know if there's anyone here to testify now. Did you have anybody else? I know Linda was on the list and she couldn't be here this evening.
She's the only
Okay.
one, if you want to,
I have a little bit of her testimony that I'd
That's
like to
fine.
read just a tiny bit of, but I won't read all of it. And so from her, she was speaking, she wanted to speak about someone that Amelia and Glenn Griswold, whose son, Devontae Ziegler, age 15, was killed by an 11-year-old friend just north of here at their home. It was a snowy day. The boys were home from school. Devontae was shoveling snow from the sidewalk. The 11-year-old child pulled out a handgun, playing with it like any child would do. The gun fired a bullet, killing Devontae. Just like that, Devontae was gone. The police arrested the 11-year-old. He was in custody for a time, but to my knowledge, there were no consequences for the adults who allowed access to the deadly weapon. You can imagine this with your own child. Amelia and Glenn and their family and friends were destroyed, still are. There's no coming back, no moving on, no tomorrow when your precious child is taken from you in this way. Amelia told us it took a good 2 years before she could even begin to understand that her baby wasn't coming home, that he was really gone, a wound that never heals. The tragedy was completely preventable. The child who committed this act should never have had access to a firearm in the first place. It was responsibility of the adults in his home to secure their firearms. I'm sure the gun owners on the committee know you would never leave your firearm somewhere your child or grandchild could access it and hurt themselves or someone else. It's an important step to make sure that other parents are as responsible as you and don't have to endure what Amelia and Glenn did. This bill would protect the security of Tennessee's children by keeping guns out of the hands of our children because a firearm is stored incorrectly. We are all safer when guns are stored, unloaded, locked, and separate from ammunition. One study found that households that locked both firearms and ammunition were associated with a 78% lower risk of self-inflicted firearm injuries and an 85% lower risk of unintentional firearm injuries among children and teens compared to those that locked neither one. Another estimated that if half of households with children have at least one unlocked gun, and they switch that to locking all their guns, 1/3 of youth gun suicides and unintentional deaths could be prevented, saving an estimated 251 lives in a single year. An estimated 54% of gun owners do not lock their guns securely. In incidents of gunfire on school grounds, up to 80% of shooters under the age of 18 got their gun from their home or the home of friends or relatives. The only way to stop these fatalities and injuries is through strong child access prevention laws, CAP laws. Several peer-reviewed studies have found that strong CAP laws are associated with a significant reduction in all pediatric firearm injuries, including those that are intentional and unintentional. The same studies found that weak CAP laws are associated with increased risk of all pediatric firearms industry. There's no reason that a child should use a gun for purpose other than sporting activities. Because of this, HB 2350 intends to punish someone who knowingly or recklessly allows a child under 12 to have access to a gun, as well as someone who sells, loans, or gifts a firearm to a minor under the age of 18. There are exceptions if the parents allowing person allowing the use of the parent of the child's consent and the child is under adult supervision, or if the child was using the firearm for lawful sporting activities, including hunting and camping. The bill also requires that people who purchase guns be informed of this when they make that purchase. The intention of this bill is not to take away anyone's guns. This legislation doesn't take away the guns out of anyone's hands unless they are recklessly allowing a child to use them. Even pro-gun organizations such as the NRA promote safe storage of guns. Keeping guns out of the hands of children who can hurt themselves and others is not against the Second Amendment. So That's what I have.
All right. Any questions for the sponsor, Leader Lambert?
Hey, Mr. Chairman, and on this one, the biggest question I kind of had on this is there's a civil liability there that the individual is civilly liable for any injury that occurs due to their failure to comply with this statute. I understand the rest of it, and I'm not a no at this juncture. I'm not a yes at this juncture. I just need some additional time. I would make a motion, move this to last calendar 2.
That is a proper motion. It has been seconded.
Can I ask a question?
You may.
So are we going to hear all the bills on last calendar too?
Yes, it is a legitimate calendar.
Okay.
All right. The motion was made. It was seconded to roll this bill to the last calendar, number 2. This will be a roll call vote. Madam Clerk, take the roll.
Representative Davis. Davis votes aye. Representative Fritz. Fritz votes aye. Representative Gillespie.
Aye.
Gillespie votes aye. Representative Hardaway.
No.
Hardaway votes no. Representative Howell. Representative Halsey. Halsey votes aye. Representative Johnson.
No.
Johnson votes no. Representative Lamberth.
Yes.
Lamberth votes aye. Representative Moody.
Aye.
Moody votes aye. Representative Russell. Russell votes aye. Representative Towns. Towns votes no. Chairman Doggett.
Aye.
Chairman Doggett votes aye. Chairman Doggett, you have 8 ayes and 3 noes.
All right. House Bill 2350 will go to last calendar, number 2. Item number 13, House Bill 2352 by Representative Johnson.
Motion.
Be
Thank you.
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would also like a roll call vote on this one as well.
Okay.
And this bill is about reporting lost and stolen guns. We have talked a little bit through this evening about how many stolen guns that we have, how that number has increased greatly, especially over the last few years. So in order to try to undo some of the damage that can cause, this bill simply requires that those who own a firearm report to law enforcement if their firearm becomes lost or stolen. If the firearm is not reported, the first violation is a civil penalty and fine of up to $500. And the second violation would be a Class B misdemeanor. Potentially that if it happens more than once, there might be a bigger reason for this. But stolen guns are often diverted to people prohibited from having guns and ended up being used in crimes. We should enact legislation requiring that lost or stolen guns be promptly reported to law enforcement, enabling quick investigation and identification of gun traffic rings whenever lost guns are used to commit a crime. In 2016, the United States Department of Justice conducted a survey of prison inmates and found that of prisoners who possessed a firearm during their offense, 56% received their firearm either by stealing it or finding it at the scene of a crime. 43% obtained it from an underground resource or black market, and only 7% of those with committing crimes purchased it from a licensed firearm dealer. That means that 90% of inmates who had the gun at the time of their offense obtained their gun illegally. This demonstrates that we need a way to keep illegally obtained guns off the streets and out of the hands of criminals. With this reporting system, law enforcement will be able to have a way to locate these firearms, potentially before lives are taken. This bill will not stop anyone from obtaining a gun through legal channels. If this bill becomes law, any law-abiding citizen who qualifies to buy a gun will be able to do so. And move passage.
All right, members, I will tell this. I spoke with the clerks earlier, and please forgive me for not making this announcement at the beginning, but this will be the last bill that we'll hear tonight. We had the room till 7:15, but we can go a little bit beyond on that with this bill. I know it's been a long day for everyone. Representative Fritz, you have a question or comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for the sponsor,
Mhm.
a failure to report results in who becoming a criminal in this, if this bill were passed?
There are exceptions for the failure to report. You want me to read those to you?
I read those.
Oh, okay.
If someone doesn't report in the timely manner, who's charged with that, and who's subject to the $500 fine?
So if it's on the first violation, so let's see. Who's subject to the fine? The gun owner who didn't report it.
Well, just one follow-up. I appreciate your heart in this. It defies common sense for me that if I had a firearm stolen, that I would report it. If I'd legally owned it, I would report it.
Okay.
And so to put a $500 fine, it's like punishing the owner of the chicken for having a chicken stolen. I'm having a hard time with understanding how this would help.
Well, you said that you would report it because that's what you should do. So if someone doesn't report it, that's suspect and there's a penalty for that.
Chairman Halsey.
Thank you. I'm kind of in the same boat he's in. You take somebody who's a victim already of a crime, and then you're going to slap another one on them. The other side of that is if a bad guy steals the gun and sells it to another bad guy, and a bad guy goes and commits crime with it, the reporting process here really doesn't stop any of that. It doesn't slow it down at all. Of course, I've seen guns stolen and sold to lawful people, thought they were getting, didn't have any idea that the gun was stolen. I got problems the same as Representative Fritz. I just hate slapping somebody twice after they're the victim to begin with. I mean, most people do, report anything stolen.
Right, and I understand that, but when they don't report the stolen, it's going to potentially lead to someone being injured or killed. And so that's why it's so critical that you would report this. And reporting it is going to help determine if it is used in a crime. It will help figure out that chain. How did this person get the gun? Well, clearly they stole it from this person who reported their gun missing. The gun goes back to that person who's missing the gun. And then the other person who committed the crime can also get charged with stealing the gun as well, as they should.
All right, Representative Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to the sponsor, is there any other statutes in the code that says a victim can be charged with a crime if they don't report that they've been a victim?
I honestly don't know, but again, I go back to the reason is because this item being stolen can lead to death.
Thank you. I understand that. And I share the same concerns as the others that have spoke. And I definitely respect you wanting to make Tennessee better, and I appreciate that. I think that I'm more into seeing some data, maybe through the reporting system whenever they collect guns or whenever they do the reports, and getting that information from the Tybers report. So thank you.
Okay. And there actually is data behind this legislation, so I could send that to you.
Thank you.
Representative Gillespie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I unfortunately don't like the penalization of someone just not, or accidentally, or whatever the reason is, that not reporting it. I will say, if it's not improper for me to say this, I know we're not going to get it today, but 58 on the calendar is a bill that's similar to this that I'm carrying that I think addresses this. All right, I'll stop.
All right. Any other questions? I do have a question before anybody else asks, or I'll let anyone else ask a question if they so choose. Okay. My question is this. You may have stated it already, but how does if someone has the firearm stolen from them and they do not report it stolen, how does law enforcement know that the firearm was stolen and whom it was stolen from in order to charge them with this penalty?
Well, and that's incredibly difficult because, and so everybody's concerned about, oh, they're going to get doubly charged. Well, that's if it, ultimately maybe when it's used in another crime, they figure out who, if there's any way to trace that gun back to whoever owned it, perhaps that way. But it's not like there's going to be a lot of penalizing on that. But what this bill is going to do is encourage people to do the right thing, so that if that gun is used in a crime, it can be traced back. They can get their firearm back, and the person who stole the gun can be charged with that as well.
Any other questions? Yes, sir. Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Chairman. And to the sponsor, you had mentioned that this will aid in investigations, and those investigations will probably result in the law enforcement being able to not just get guns off the street, but get criminals off the street. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And there's also data that shows it can lead to catching some of these rings that are selling guns illegally. And it has helped in that and led to that as well. As I said, I do have research and data that shows and demonstrates this.
So you could have a stolen gun that's being trafficked, and yet if it's not reported, you could have a criminal walk free because that gun was not reported as stolen. Is that correct?
Yeah, that could happen. But again, it's all about making sure that's reported so that it can be traced back, and also in helping find the gun before it's used in a crime.
Well, I think it's a great bill. I urge everyone to support it.
All right. Any other questions for the sponsor? Question's been called. Any objection? Seeing none, we're voting to send House Bill 2352 to full criminal. This will be a roll call vote. Madam Clerk, take the roll.
Representative Davis? Davis votes no. Representative Fritz? Fritz votes no. Representative Gillespie?
No.
Representative Gillespie votes no. Representative Hardaway?
Aye.
Hardaway votes aye. Representative Howell? Representative Halsey?
No.
Halsey votes no. Representative Johnson?
Yes.
Johnson votes aye. Representative Lamberth?
No.
Lamberth votes no. Representative Moody? Moody votes no. Representative Russell? Russell votes no. Representative Towns? Towns votes aye. Chairman Doggett?
No.
Chairman Doggett votes no. Chairman Doggett, you have 8 noes and 3 ayes.
All right. House Bill 2352 fails. Members, that is all we're going to be able to accomplish. Hold up. Hold up. We got to roll all bills not heard tonight will be rolled to next week's calendar. We are adjourned.